SECfans.com. Week 14, otherwise known as Championship Week, is here. Before we get into those discussions, we are going to talk a little bit about the games that we had last week. So we've got Auburn, Alabama, the Iron Bowl as it is known, the huge one, Michigan, Ohio State, and going to talk a little bit about Texas A&M and LSU. That was a weird one, and it bears a little bit of discussion. So getting right into this, Husky is with me again each and every week, and you know, we talked about the Iron Bowl for an hour last week. Some people complained. Some people thought it was great. I'm going to say, you know what? It deserved that amount of time. So the model said 31-14 was going to be the score. Ended up being 30-12. That's probably the third or fourth time this year that the model has just been spooky accurate. And just for everybody who picked up with us late, we didn't start doing the model until I think it was about week 6 or 7, something like that. So that's pretty awesome. Tooting your own horn for you there, Husky. So anyway, what we had was a really lopsided game in terms of statistics, and probably not as lopsided in the score as it could have been, given the fact that Auburn had the most efficient yards to point ratio seemingly in college football history, with that 34 yards to 9 points first half. So before I get into any of my thoughts on the game, I'd love, Husky, for you to talk a little bit about how this game played out, what we learned from this game, and how much this game fit with the model, not just in score, but in an overall, prediction of the game and how it would play out.
We ran this model. I'm sure a lot of people sort of looked at it and said, 31-14, I guess, but it's going to be more of a low scoring game, close game between these two teams, two great defenses. It really wasn't. I mean, it was, as you said, 31-14 model, 30-12 result. That's about as spot on as you're going to get. But, we're going to get to it just a second, but you're going to see that it's actually a lot more spooky than that when you got into the numbers we pumped out with the model. But the first thing I want to really touch on is the fact that anyone that went into this game expecting anything other than the result that happened had an unrealistic expectation. Because this model that we run is designed to be a predictor of if both teams have their average game relative to the strengths and weaknesses of the other team, what does that look like? That's what the model spits out. And sometimes it's off. One team may have an unusually good game. One team maybe have a bad one. You have games like LSU, Alabama, where, LSU, I think, was just absolutely stoked up in that ball game to play, and things go a little unusually. Sometimes you have games riddled with injuries. We talked earlier in the year, it had Alabama with a huge blowout over Tennessee, and we predicted that it was going to be too conservative because of the massive injury situation at Tennessee. In this case, we both felt like the model was probably pretty accurate. We both thought we thought it would be even lower scoring. We ended up being wrong. But, 31-14 tells part of the story. The yardage tells an even bigger one. The model said Alabama would have 4.65 yards per carry, 7.1 yards per attempt. Alabama had 4.6 yards per carry, 8.1 yards per attempt. It said Auburn, this is creepy. Auburn would have 6.1 yards per attempt, 2.4 yards per carry. Auburn had 6.1 yards per attempt and 2.5 yards per carry.
And this is where we step in and tell Vegas if they want to pay us for some sort of consultancy fee. We are open, SECfans.com. Just drop us a message. We're happy to share ahead of time any thoughts that we might have on any future games, as long as the earnings follow.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm helping people win money against Vegas and they want to, pay me to live in a hotel room somewhere, I'm more than happy to do so. But yeah, I mean, our yard per play prediction split up run and pass. I mean, what is that, accurate to about 95%?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
It's bang on. So why am I saying all that, tooting my own horn a bit? Every time I do that, make a prediction and go back and reference it, it's to say the result that we saw here was not anything unexpected. This is exactly what you should have expected the game to be. Again, a computer model spit out this exact yardage. So if you felt like Auburn's offense was absolutely anemic and you're shocked, then you need to step back a little bit and realize Alabama's defense is that good. They have made everyone look that bad relative to how they look going into the game this season. And Auburn also has been that bad statistically every time they've played an elite defense. It's just they've looked really bad a number of times against Clemson, even against LSU, against Georgia. And Alabama is on a different level defensively than those teams. Likewise, Alabama scored 30 points. And again, if you thought that was surprising, you underestimated how good Alabama's been defensively. We've talked a lot about Alabama this year. And I think we've made it pretty clear. Well, one of the big reasons is we have a lot of followers in the state of Alabama. A lot of people watch our show. They're a big fan base. Same with Auburn. That's why we talk about both teams. But we've also made clear, statistically, this Alabama team is pushing the like 95 Nebraska mold in terms of points per game, margins per victory. It is truly elite and bordering on historic if they keep up this margin. I think was it 538 is another big modeling site that does a lot of statistical analysis of a lot of different things. And they've indicated that if Alabama held a 20-point margin for victory over Auburn and Florida, they would have Alabama ahead of 95 Nebraska as the most dominant team in the modern era of football. In terms of their whatever their statistical model, points per, point advantage per team thing. So everything we see this year with Alabama is always lopsided. It always seems ridiculous. We probably always sound ridiculous. It's just what this team is this year. They're just that good, and that's why the model spit out what seems like some absurd numbers, right? Under 2.5 yards per carry for Auburn and whatnot, and it ended up being absolutely dead on.
And so, getting into a couple of storylines in this game, we didn't think Sean White would play, and he didn't play. We also didn't think Cameron Petway would play, and Alabama fans would probably say he didn't play either. But I think he's probably 60-70% in that game. And again, like we said, 100% Cam Petway without Sean White probably is immaterial because you're missing so much of what he brings to the game and really the running game in general, because you don't have a run threat at quarterback with Jeremy Johnson, and that seemed to play out pretty much like we said it would. I think he had 12 carries for 17 yards, and that's not, again, I think some Alabama fans will say, haha, Cameron Petway is a little bit overblown, whatever, but it's not true. The guy's been great all year. This is just what Alabama does to run defenses, especially run between the tackle defenses, but it's also what's going to happen to an Auburn team that's beaten up and battered. So if you're a Bama fan, don't read too much into that on Monday morning water cooler talk when you're trying to be a jerk to an Auburn fan. Interestingly, I think we saw a little bit of, I know we saw a little bit of this quarterback carousel that kind of showed up early in the season. And I want you to talk a little bit about that in terms of, from the outside looking in, what I would think is that if they had any intention of playing John Franklin III as much as they did in this game, why not let him play the entire Alabama A&M game and spend the entire week practicing with him to just go out there and live or die by a guy who showed he can complete a deep ball and has some speed. What can you glean from that and give us a little insight as to why they wouldn't do that and just go all in with him and keep with this sort of hybrid approach where they run a quarterback out and send another one out, the way they did it in this game?
Auburn clearly came out with a game plan that they were going to try to run their basic offense, keep things conservative, and try to see if they could manufacture some points different ways. To some degree, it worked, right? I mean, they go in right before halftime. It's a 10-9 ball game. Alabama scores, gets a field goal there, make it 13-9. And, the trick to all of that is they don't want to make any mistakes. Jeremy Johnson, throughout his career, has been prone to massive errors, right? And John Franklin has also been prone to a large number of turnovers. Franklin has an incredible number of fumbles in his career for the limited number of touches he's had. He's just not very big. but I think he was the explosive X factor, and I think they wanted to try to run with Jeremy Johnson as long as they could, and try to run Cameron Petway. I'm with you that Petway was probably 60-70%, and I bring this up again because the first couple of series, Petway was almost exclusively a decoy. They had him in the backfield, and they'd run a jet sweep. They motion him out and then run it with a different back, or they'd hand it off to a receiver on a sweep, or they would try to run up the middle with Johnson. It was actually amazing to me how much they were trying not to give the ball to Cameron Petway initially, and they only really started trying to do that after they kind of got stopped a little too much. But let's I think it's important to understand with passers how much the number of passes and the situation affects things. First, Dimmy, do you know off the top of your head who the leading passer was in terms of QB rating in this game? It,
Uh,
it was our it was our Darius Stewart,
it
right?
was a good
It
throw.
only
It was a good throw.
it was a good throw by an Alabama receiver. Yeah, to Howard, the tight end, I think it was.
Auburn fans would
And
certainly answer that question with absolutely not Chandler Cox.
right. Yeah, but that's it, right? The number one passer in the game is Darius Stewart, who was one of one. The number two QBR is actually John Franklin III with 2 of 4 passing. The number third is Jalen Hurts. Fourth is Jeremy Johnson, and fifth was Chandler Cox in terms of QB rating. And the thing is, with that, it's easy to have a really great QBR when you only throw 1, 2, 3, 4 passes, especially when you're someone like John Franklin III that is being used as a wildcat quarterback and you're just taking random deep shots. He had one long completion where he hit a guy going downfield, throws a pretty good deep ball, but there is no real intermediate passing threat. And as I remember that play, which looked pretty impressive, the bigger issue was actually that Alabama busted coverage. There's a safety that's supposed to be over the top, and there's a breaking kind of a deep post on the outside, and they have the inside guy run a more of a shallow post where he's crossing over the middle, and the safety went with a shallow route and left the outside guy open downfield. They managed to complete the big play. Notably, didn't score a touchdown on it, but it was just kind of one random pop pass. And sometimes you can say that's all you need, but they immediately didn't move the ball again because they had no consistency in the passing game or the run game needed to move it. Um, all of that said, you to answer your initial question, why do you not go with John Franklin III? I think it's because they knew they're not going to win this game without some semblance of an intermediate passing game, right? You've got to be able to move the sticks. John Franklin III, it looks great when you put him in, and he occasionally has a big play. And when you're looking back on this game, you think, who made a big play? Well, it was Franklin III. Why didn't we give him the ball more? Well, the problem is Franklin III may have made a big play, but when Franklin III wasn't making a big play, he really wasn't doing much of anything when he was on the field because there was no threat to throw the ball short or short. There's no threat to throw the ball over the middle of the field. The only thing is the safeties have to stay back a little bit for the deep ball, but beyond that, there's nothing dynamic about the offense. Johnson had a chance to do more, but Johnson was almost shockingly ineffective.
And what's interesting about this, and I want you to complete that thought, but I want to frame it within the context of something that I noticed. Auburn's offensive line did by far the best any offensive line has done this year to slow Alabama's front four. Like, it wasn't even close. Johnson had a lot of time, and not an unbelievable amount of time, but in the context of the amount of time Alabama normally gives someone to pass, he had an eternity, and he still struggled.
Right. The problem for everybody in these situations is you don't learn how to run an offense in a week. John Franklin III has really been groomed as a change of pace wildcat quarterback. He has probably a very limited number of sets that he can run. I think they all but abandoned him after an early part of the season where he just wasn't effective. They kind of went back to him right for the Vandy game. He was an absolute disaster in that game. And there's no way the coaching staff has forgotten that fact. Again, he turned the ball over a number of times in that game. And if he had done that in this game, they used Franklin and he fumbled in their own 20, they would have been out of this game in the first quarter. One fumble on their own side of the field, the same sort of mistakes that Alabama made early in the game that kept Auburn in it. If Auburn had made those mistakes, this would have been a 50-6 ball game.
Right.
It would have gotten really out of hand really fast. And Johnson, may be a limited guy in terms of his ability to make reads. He's had that problem his whole career, but honestly, he had that problem initially. He hasn't been that bad since then. He's just become indecisive. I think he's indecisive, and a lot of these guys become indecisive because he's aware of the fact that he makes bad mistakes. So he's hesitating, so he doesn't throw an interception, but at least you're not making the crucial mistake to knock you out of the ball game. And Johnson has taken enough reps over the years that they were comfortable running the full offense with him in a way they probably couldn't do with Franklin. I think it's a little concerning that they had no backup plan with behind Sean White. But on the other hand, they went into the season. I don't think they really expected Sean White to be the full time starter. But this is all where you really see sometimes that you win and lose games in March, April, May, June. You don't not in October and November. And it was the lack of preparation before the season that limited the options they had now. Um, and there's a lot of things Alabama did to make Jalen Hurts comfortable, who was honestly struggling very badly in this game. But they could make him comfortable because the offensive line could get push, because Alabama's receivers are very, very good on a completely different level, frankly, than what Auburn has right now. There was a little, what we used to call it a tiger route, where the guy runs, he turns in like he's going to run an in route. And then as soon as that DB turns his hips and starts running in, he plants his foot and cuts back out. So he runs an in and then immediately cuts back out to the sideline. And they hit Ardarius Stewart right, and it was a highlight play where a third down conversion turns into a big touchdown. That play has a lot to do with Ardarius Stewart, his ability to force the corner to aggressively try to attack him, his ability to stop and start, make a clean catch, turn up field, and have a little bit of wiggle to score. Auburn does not have a single player on the team with that kind of capacity. Oddly, the one guy that I think probably does have that kind of talent is Franklin the third. But you have him at quarterback. It's unfortunate that I think Franklin's probably the best athlete on the team, and I don't think he's willing to switch positions. And he's probably been told by Auburn that he probably should. And I've heard rumors about he's considering transferring. That kid really needs to understand that he's probably an NFL player if he plays the skill position, but he is never going to be an NFL quarterback with that arm.
So this is something that I want you to touch on, and I know Alabama fans hang with us. We're going to talk about Alabama too, but we need to spend some time on Auburn because their season was, this close to being something really special. So Gus is getting a lot of criticism after this game, and he's been getting off and on criticism all year. And I wonder, is it a fair situation to compare Gus a little bit to Sumlin in that he lives and dies by whether or not he can have the perfect quarterback, not just a good quarterback, but the perfect quarterback for his perfect system and his perfect play calling? And is that when you put those sort of constraints and limitations on yourself as a coach, does that mean that you're destined to fail? Or is it a situation where it's not so much that and they've just had some bad luck?
I think there are a lot of limitations to the way Malzahn systems work. I think Malzahn is actually a lot more flexible than Sumlin. Sumlin asks more of his quarterback. Well, I will say there's two coaches in the conference that ask more of the quarterback than anyone else. That's Texas A&M with Sumlin, and it's Ole Miss with Hugh Freeze. Those guys require an incredible amount of high-level play from the quarterback to be successful because they use a ton of downfield routes and they have a ton of five-man protections where the quarterback has to have a hot read and get it out quickly because there's nobody there to help him in the backfield a lot of times. Everybody's going out, including the running back in a route. And when you're throwing the ball down the field constantly, those are difficult throws. And it may give you a ton of chunk plays, and you can be very explosive on offense. But it also means if you're in any way inaccurate, you can, even against a bad team, be going 3 and out constantly, which we've seen from Ole Miss in the second half of the year. I don't think Auburn is that bad. I don't. I think the ability to have a power run game means they have more consistency. Auburn, for all the wailing and gnashing of teeth, is going to end up with a decently good record, right? I mean,
Right.
they're not staying home for Christmas the way Ole Miss is going to have to do this year. They are an 8-4 team, And they're an 8-4 team because they do have a power run element to the offense. They can generate offense against bad teams without having to be overly productive. The problem is Auburn's style of offense to be successful against good teams requires elite quarterback play. Everything, all those power run plays and the motion, it's all pretty susceptible to disruption in the backfield. It all requires a lot of push. And if you can get in the backfield and you can get push, as we've seen many times, you can shut it down because it's a lot like Oregon. And I complained about this for years, and of course now it doesn't matter because Oregon's a shell of what they were. But Oregon's offense was designed to get 6 to 8 yards per play, really, and they would push and push and push until you got so desperate to stop them that you would just you would march both your safeties up, start blitzing like crazy, and then they would pop you for a big touchdown because you've gotten unsound in the back end and coverage. But every time they played a team that could actually, hold them to 4 yards per play and make them march down the field, which Stanford was about the only team in the conference that could do that, they would repeatedly get shut down. Auburn has a lot of the same issues, and it's because, as I've said, we've talked about this several times in the show. Auburn is running, really not running Malzahn's offense; they're running Todd Graham's offense, zone read power game, running the football. And to be able to do that successfully, you've got to have a little bit of push, and you've got to be able to generate some mismatches, and you've got to have, a lot of cleanliness in the backfield to have all that motion get pulled off correctly. And if you don't, you end up with a lot of negative plays. You don't get enough consistent yardage, and you tend to end up, even if you start sustaining drives, you end up punting a lot more than you should. And when you play a really good team, sometimes like Alabama, that can really stop you from getting 4 or 5 yards consistently, it can completely shut down because this offensive system doesn't have the downfield passing tree to generate yardage and points. If you want to, if you want to play football against an NFL team, you better have some advanced pass routes that are going to exploit whatever coverage is there, and just it doesn't even matter. A lot of the NFL, if you have a good quarterback, it's almost plug and play. Whoever everybody else is, and even a really bad team, even the Cleveland Browns will put up points in a football game. They may lose terribly, but they will score in an NFL team because that style of offense will exploit. If you're in a cover two, certain plays are almost guaranteed to be successful. If you're in cover three, this play will be successful. If you're sitting in a man scheme with cover zero, these plays will be successful, on and on and on. Nothing Auburn does is designed to exploit coverage like that. What it's doing is it exploits you when you over pursue in the run game and you aren't disciplined, whatever your coverage may be. In fact, I don't think a lot of the checks by the quarterbacks are designed to read coverage at all. What they do is they say, we're going to run this play, and then you look at this guy and see if he's open. And they don't really, they're not looking at safeties and stuff pre-snap so much. They're just looking for the open man. But again, when the other team can stop the run and they can play sound in the back end, there is no open man. You don't have the run game, and then stuff just starts to shut down. And I'm a little curious what Sean White would look like in some of these situations. The closest we got was the LSU game. But the irony of this, I think, is Sean White keeps getting hurt before Alabama, and I don't know what Sean White Auburn looks like against an Alabama defense. What I do know is that Jeremy Johnson isn't a good enough runner to really make the run game work. And what you see is when Jeremy Johnson is way too eager to pull the trigger in previous years, so nobody would be open and he'd throw it anyway and have a million interceptions. And now he's just become too hesitant to throw the ball, so no one's open, or he assumes no one's open, and he won't throw it unless they're really, really open. So point being, yeah, I think a really good quarterback's important, particularly if he's a great runner, because if he's a great runner and you can put a strain on the defense to stop the run, then the other team's going to start busting coverage and doing the sort of things that you need them to do, marching the linebackers up to have guys open. But you don't really need an elite passer. They've never had an elite passer under Malzahn. I'm not sure it would even help so much because of the style of offense. I think they tried to be a passing offense, and it really was Malzahn's system in 2015 that failed pretty spectacularly early with Jeremy Johnson. And I think what we saw is that it doesn't really quite work. You just need a good enough athlete. Really, all you need, it doesn't even have to be a great athlete. All you need is the run game to work really well, and everything opens up. And if the run game isn't working really well, it doesn't. A long-winded explanation, but I think this is sort of the story of the year for Auburn, and it's worth giving my 3 or 4 cents instead of just two.
Yeah, I think it's a worthy detour because we've been on the periphery of discussing Auburn and their issues, not just their issues, but where their successes are against certain teams and matchups and things like that. So I think it's a worthy discussion. I just worry for Auburn's development in terms of consistency as a program if they can do it, if they have to rely on finding that perfect quarterback for their system, and playing within the constraints of, whether or not Gus wants to be constrained in terms of play calling and what kind of schemes he wants to do. Okay, so for all the Alabama fans that bailed on us early because we wouldn't shut up about Auburn, hope y'all can come back and are back now because we're going to talk about Alabama. And Auburn fans, feel free to tune out here for a minute because we're going to talk about Alabama. And first off, Jalen Hurts, was it? You might disagree with me. I know some Alabama fans disagree with me, but I think Jalen Hurts was pretty bad in the first half, borderline atrocious, and not just because of the turnovers, but the interceptions were bad. And I know they mentioned on the broadcast that the two wide receivers ran into two defenders and fell down, but it was a bad read anyway. And the interception where he was going to Stewart was pretty bad. But my bigger concern are the fumbles. If I'm an Alabama fan, Jalen Hurts has fumbled in many consecutive games, and Alabama had some luck in this game in terms of having the fumbles bounce back to them. But Jalen Hurts has both lost fumbles or had, yes, a ground called fumble, but that means he's not carrying it very, very securely. So tell me, do you think this game was, because we saw a different Jalen Hurts in the second half, was this more Jalen Hurts calming down in the second half, or was it Lane Kiffin adjusting the strategy to play to what he knew Jalen Hurts could do? And I'm going to let you run with that one.
I think there was an adjustment really in terms of play calling and style that mattered. I don't really think there's any doubt of that, to be honest. To touch on what you said earlier, Hurts had a really rough first half. I mean, he was not a great quarterback. He wasn't making good reads. There's a lot of things people probably saw that were having issues. Whether it be throwing down the field, he was actually throwing pretty accurately. Both interceptions. The first interception was a poor throw, frankly. It was thrown too far inside. The second one, like you said, really wasn't a great read. That didn't bother me as much. My bigger issue is both those throws didn't have anywhere near enough heat on them. They really were floated up and let the defense just sort of get in position and sit and pick them off. And the one there was an earlier one, and I think the guys kind of undercut it a little bit, but that one should have been far closer to the boundary. But it's something we've talked about a lot when we've watched Alabama games, where you can see a lot of time Hurts just sort of placing the ball instead of throwing it. You're not trusting his arm and delivering it. And when he does that, it also means he's trying to throw too soon. He needs to wait a tick. It's odd, right?
Wait. Did you just say Jalen Hurts threw the ball too soon?
Yes. Yes, I did. And I was about to say how strange that is, because when he's throwing deep, he waits too long and he, waiting for his guy to be wide open to throw it. But it was weird on those two throws. It's like he wanted to get it out soon, probably because there was pressure. And there's a lot of statistics that I've heard in the broadcast. Thank you, Gary Danielson, for repeating the same stuff over and over again. That Jalen Hurts has a terrible passer rating when pressured, and I think we saw that when he was starting to get pressure in his face. He goes, "Oh, I need to throw the ball," and I think there was a cross between, I think it was Ridley and Howard on the left side of the field, and he just goes ahead and he throws it, and he knows where Howard's supposed to be, but if he really throws the ball, it's going to get there way before Howard does. So he kind of floats it up to let Howard run under it. And what happens is, after he throws it, Howard gets caught up. Then I think the freshman DB for Auburn ends up sitting there, and picks the ball off, and you go, wow, it's a great play. Look at that. Javaris Davis makes a wonderful interception. But if Hurts had actually waited to see where the break was, he could have thrown to the same point with more velocity and known whether or not it was going to be a completion. But he was so determined to throw before the break, in large part because there was pressure coming, that he releases early and floats it. And this is sort of the maddening reality of a freshman quarterback. And I probably got a lot of heat early in the season because I was very critical at times of playing a freshman quarterback. Um, I am not critical of the player. I am, and the show being very realistic about what each team's strengths and weaknesses are. It's not a good thing to start a freshman quarterback in the SEC. It's never a good thing. And the reason is, like we're saying, when he needs to throw it earlier on a deep route and anticipate the break, he's not doing it. And when he needs to wait for the guy to get open when you're throwing underneath, which you do need to wait for him to be open underneath, he's impatient because of pressure. And that's just a freshman player that hasn't figured out when to do what thing, when to do another thing. He doesn't quite understand coverages. He's not really making proper reads. He's not predicting where the guy will be open. Instead, he's looking to see whether or not he is open later. That's not the way the offense is designed to work. There were a number of plays in that game where there were little throws to a check down receiver that I felt like he could have put way more heat on, and they would have had a lot more separation when the ball was caught. And something, getting back to a statement I never finished earlier, they ran a lot of zone read concepts in the first quarter and a half. And one of the things that was killing them was Hurts was repeatedly making the wrong reads on the zone read. And a lot of times, I think Danielson was complaining about the lack of commitment to the running backs, and he doesn't understand the game plan. It really wasn't a lack of commitment to the running backs. There were a lot of plays called that should have gone to the backs. Hurts was just choosing to keep it. It's a problem he's had all year where he's not distributing the football the way he should, where he's pulling it when he shouldn't pull it and let his back, handle the dive. It's just most of the time Alabama's been so good that, and again, this is something we've talked about all year. Alabama has a 15-yard play if they hand to the back. Instead, they get a 6-yard play with Hurts. This is one of the first times really LSU and Auburn are the two defenses that were good enough for you to see, okay, he had an 8-yard play with a tailback and instead he got a 3-yard carry. And then people start to get a lot more wailing and gnashing of teeth because they're not getting first downs. But it's the same mistakes we've seen all year. It's just a defense that was good enough for it to really matter.
Yeah, I think we've seen that. It's so stark, the difference between Hurts versus Mississippi State, who can't spell the word defense, and consistently Hurts against LSU, Auburn, even Chattanooga, who has a good defense. We've talked about that before. Okay, so one more thing on Hurts. I do think he threw the ball better in the second half, and I will say the seam route he threw just over the outstretched arms, I think it was of Davis, and I believe that was in the third quarter. That throw was probably the best throw he's made all year. I know they said that the touchdown throw, the boundary throw on that out to Stewart was the best throw he made of the game, but it was not. The throw he made, that seam route, I think it was to the slot receiver on the left side, best throw I've seen him make all year. So the talent is there, and that's not, when we talk about, first of all, there's not much to criticize about this Alabama team, so we have to pick on some things. But when we talk about his struggles in the passing game, it's from a perspective of these are the weaknesses that Alabama has, and that's just the reality of it. I think if you're seeing these things as a freshman, you're probably not going to see a lot of weaknesses as a junior. So the talent is there. Everybody knows it's there, but we're not going to hold him to any different standard than we would any other player on this team. So interesting to your point about Gary and running the ball and the things that he was saying in this game. I'm not going to go into a rant on Gary in this game. He was a little bit annoying on both sides in terms of sort of pressing points that he should have let go. That's another discussion for another day. But to his point about running the ball, I do think it's interesting because the takeaway from this game for Alabama fans is man, Bo Scarborough really showed up. He's been hurt for a couple of weeks, and really kind of made a difference in this game. But if you look at his statistics, 5.3 yards per carry, long of 20 yards. Damian Harris, 5.2 yards per carry, long of 20 yards. So it's funny to me, and maybe you got a different perception, but even watching the game, I felt the same way. Like, oh, Bo's really showed up. But it's funny to me because Damian Harris was equally as effective. Josh Jacobs had 6.4 yards per carry, also effective. So it is funny how, for whatever reason, and even someone who's been on the Damian Harris bandwagon all year, still susceptible to this whole like, oh, he really didn't show up, when in actuality he did. So talk about that a little bit. Did you have the same impression coming away from that game that Bo had a monster game and Damian was kind of quiet? Am I crazy in that?
No, I had the same feeling. I mean, you watched him and you felt like, wow, they really aren't doing much. And I think it was largely because he didn't get many touches. I'm just like we often do when we're sitting here talking, and you're talking here. I'm flipping through the play chart, right? First, I think it's notable that Alabama only punted twice in this ball game. They only scored 30 points. They only punted twice. They had so many interceptions and fumbles that they gave away a ton of drives, but they punted on the opening drive when they I think Ardarius Stewart dropped a pass on third down at midfield, and then they punted later when they took a couple penalties and backed themselves up, and that was it. But looking at the first two drives here, and it's 17 plays, Harris only had 2 carries. So, you think he's being ineffective, and I think it was in large part because it's like we said, especially those first couple drives, and particularly that second drive, which by the way ran from 12:30 in the first quarter all the way to 5:40 in the first quarter. It was a 7.5 minute drive that ended with a field goal. Hurts was repeatedly keeping it when he should have been handing it, and that meant Harris was never really getting the ball. He had one run for no gain in that entire drive, and you may in your head you see Harris on the field a ton, and you think he's being ineffective. He never had the ball. And when he finally did start getting the ball, his next touch is a 17-yard reception. And then his next touch is a 12-yard run. And so,
So let me
he
ask
doesn't
let me
get
ask you this, because I think you have some insight on this, and I think it's a good question.
his next touch, by the way, is a 20-yard run. I mean, so he was being really successful.
So we've noticed Alabama struggle in the first quarter of this year a lot, maybe in the first half. So do you think, because they've never really said this, whether they do or not. Some teams say they do, some teams don't comment on it. First question, do you think that Lane Kiffin scripts the first X amount of plays? And two, if that's the case, I've noticed that Jalen Hurts throws the ball a lot in the first half. So if that's the case, that means they're scripting a lot of throws early on. So if you think number one is yes, why do you think it is that they're scripting so many pass plays up front?
I think they do script. I've never heard of any coach that does not script the opening 2 drives of the first half and 1 or 2 of the second. Um, I think he throws the ball a lot because if you want to be really aggressive and score, you have to be balanced. There's no point in scripting if you're just going to run the ball off tackle every play because you're not really exploiting anything. But what we've seen is, and this was really, I think, a big failing, frankly, of Kiffin in this game. He's calling plays that in theory should work, and he's exploiting things. The problem is he's calling plays that his quarterback just isn't comfortable executing at this point in his career. And so at some point you have to realize, yes, there's a 30-yard play available rather, but you have to understand, there's no indication that Alabama will consistently make that play. And, rather than doing that 30-yard play, you could just hand it off on a sweep and get 7 yards and move the sticks and get first downs. And yeah, it may take longer and it may not be as flashy, but you're going to put points on the board. And so I think that's the deal. Kiffin is sort of outsmarting himself. He knows the plays there, and there's just some piece of him that isn't really at times capable of looking at this team and going, yes, this is the perfect play to run in this opportunity, but we're just not very good at running it. And I see this, like, feels like every first half that I've watched Alabama this year, I walk away going, wow, if they actually executed those plays properly, they'd be up 40-0. But they never are, because they do have a true freshman quarterback. There's, as you said, I'm not holding against Hurts in any way, shape, or form that he's a true freshman quarterback. But if you want to talk about why Alabama is what it is, it's because they have a true freshman quarterback. But at the same time, there are certain things you shouldn't be stressing when you have a true freshman quarterback and when you have an outstanding run game. And yeah, I think Kiffin just outsmarts himself. He really does.
And I think I think can also be viewed maybe as a testament to Kiffin that he has enough faith and belief in his players, even though they are true freshmen running his offense, that he lets them sink or swim a little bit without overprotecting him with the run game, because he knows, as we saw against Ole Miss, that he can do it at any moment. So let's put maybe some punctuation on this game. I think based on what you said in your gut prediction versus the model prediction, you predicted the same margin. So in terms of final takeaways from this game, was there anything that surprised you for either team? I know you said the score was what we should be expecting, but just in a sort of a macro sense, anything looking at this game, any takeaways for you that might be hidden in the numbers or otherwise?
Something that's not really in the numbers that surprised me was the fact that they didn't commit to Jeremy Johnson throwing the ball down the field. One of the things that Alabama's always been susceptible of with these corners is just shot plays down the field, throwing 50-50 balls. In a game where your offense can't move it, it's better to do that than just to go 3 and out. Even if you throw picks, I mean, you're going to punt it anyway. And instead they play 3 quarterbacks. When they use Johnson, I didn't feel like his one strength is he throws an accurate deep ball. He may not make good decisions with it, but he's actually pretty darn accurate throwing down the field. They never really tried it. And instead, I think both of us commented on how bizarre it was that they had what was clearly a wing tee, veer tee pass by Chandler Cox called on one play. I think it was a 4th down play. Saw they didn't have the look they wanted and called a timeout, and you see Auburn start to run through it. He spins around, looks downfield, and we text each other and go, "That was a pass." And then later on at the end of the game, it's 4th down and they're trying to score, and they called the same darn play with the
Yeah.
fullback and a 4th and long. It's 4th and long. Everyone in the stadium knows you're going to throw the ball. We've already seen that you have this pass play by Cox in the playbook because you started to run it earlier. Why in heaven's name do you not put Jeremy Johnson in and just tell him throw it and it doesn't matter what happens? That's the thing that surprised me, is that they didn't let Johnson take chances knowing that they probably weren't going to win if he didn't.
Yeah, and that was it's funny, I had a similar takeaway in this game that I did after the Clemson game, where I went on a rant about Gus Malzahn, and this quarterback carousel thing, instead of committing to one guy and having a game plan around him and having a team get some continuity and rallying around a single guy. It was maddening to watch that, because they could have beaten Clemson. Sean White plays that whole game, they beat Clemson. Well, in this game, you've got to play the hand you're dealt, and they were dealt having to either put a game plan around John Franklin III, and if they didn't have the faith in that, then they should have committed wholly to Jeremy Johnson, who can get on a hot streak. But who doesn't get on a hot streak? Somebody who's pulled in the middle of a drive. You're not Steve Spurrier. Stop trying to do that. So when I saw the same thing, and we, like you said, we talked about this during the game, when I saw them run that Chandler Cox pass on 4th down, it made me mad. Like, I couldn't believe that he did that. As someone who's been a Gus supporter in the past, it's like you're not helping your case here. So that kind of stuff just doesn't work against Alabama, and especially doesn't work when you've already shown your cards. That's 2 for those of you counting at home. 2 card analogies, metaphors in the same mini rant. So, okay, to wrap this one up, yeah, I agree with you. This is exactly what we thought it would be. I think the score could have been a little bit worse, but I think Auburn's defense did play as well as they could given what they were up against. And if they get healthy and if they end up in the Sugar Bowl, I could see them giving someone a game or even winning. So Auburn fans, your season is not over. You still have something to play for. So get behind your team and just pray for some injuries to get healed up.